Tanks are burning. Villages once liberated are falling again. Ukraine's great counteroffensive? Crushed, and Russia is winning back territory. So what happened? Billions of dollars. NATO weapons, global promises. And yet Ukraine is losing ground. Has the West quietly walked away? This isn't just geopolitics. It's about lives, trust, sacrifice, and what happens when the world stops caring. Ukraine's counteroffensive was supposed to change everything. For months, Western media, NATO generals, and even Kyiv itself had promised a massive push to reclaim occupied territories. Billions of dollars in Western military aid had poured in. New tanks, long-range missiles, advanced training. The message was clear. This was the moment Ukraine would turn the war around. But today, the picture looks very different. Russian forces have not only held their ground, they've retaken key areas like Avdiivka and are now pushing deeper into Ukrainian territory, including parts of the Kharkov region. So what went wrong? Did Ukraine overpromise? Or is something deeper happening, something involving Washington, Brussels, and the shifting interests of the West? Let's break this down. The 2023 counteroffensive began with sky-high expectations. Western leaders, analysts, even military think tanks predicted dramatic progress, perhaps even the return of Crimea. But the operation soon hit a wall. Russia had spent the winter fortifying its defenses. Endless minefields, artillery lines, trench systems modeled after World War I, and despite having advanced US-supplied tanks like the Abrams and Bradleys, Ukrainian troops couldn't push through. In fact, many of these modern vehicles were destroyed within days, if not hours. But this wasn't just a tactical failure. It drained Ukraine's most experienced soldiers. It shattered morale. And suddenly, the world stopped watching quite as closely. Here's the twist. While Ukraine struggled on the battlefield, the US, its biggest backer, was busy fighting its own political war. For months, military aid packages stalled in Congress. Republicans began openly questioning the strategy. Why are we spending billions on a war that's going nowhere? And in Europe, far-right parties surged in elections, many of them openly pro-Russia, or at least anti-intervention. The unity that defined the early months of the war? It's cracking. Quietly but surely. Meanwhile, Russia is doing something no one expected, going on the offensive. With support from North Korea and Iran, and indirect blessings from China, Putin's war machine has kicked into overdrive. Missiles keep raining down on Ukrainian cities. Factories in Russia are working 24/7, and the Kremlin knows one thing very clearly. Time is on their side. Zelensky, once hailed as a modern Churchill, is now struggling to get Western leaders to even return his calls. His speeches at the UN, once met with thunderous applause, now get polite claps at best. Media coverage has dropped sharply. And the average Western citizen? Many have moved on. The war, for them, has become background noise. Which brings us to the real question. Has the West, in effect, abandoned Ukraine? Not with words, but with actions. The aid is slower, the weapons fewer, the urgency is gone. And if that trend continues, Ukraine may be left with no choice but to negotiate on Russia's terms. If Putin wins not by overwhelming military strength, but simply by outlasting the West's attention span, what kind of message does that send to the world? It tells China that Taiwan could be next. It tells authoritarian regimes everywhere that Western unity is temporary, conditional, fragile. And let's not forget, this war isn't just about Ukraine. It's about the credibility of the democratic world, about whether modern alliances like NATO can actually deter aggression, or just react to it with hashtags and funding delays. So, has the West truly turned its back on Ukraine? Not completely, but the silence is getting louder. the cracks are turning into fractures. And for Ukraine, whose soldiers are still holding the line in freezing trenches with dwindling supplies, the price of that silence could be devastating. What do you think? Is this war being quietly lost, not by Ukraine on the battlefield, but by the West in the war of willpower? Let me know in the comments below. Share this video if you feel the story needs to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe for more global conflict analysis, because what happens in Ukraine won't stay in Ukraine.